Okay, in this video I just wanted to talk about my kind of initial thoughts and reactions to the Panasonic GH7. And by now, you'll likely have seen the announcement. You've probably binged about 50 videos on the GH7. The launch announcement was a little bit weird. It was sort of like 5 minutes long, and a few minutes of that was someone just kicking a camera out of someone's hand. So it was a bit weird, but what I've done is I've tried to sort of, dig out as many kind of specs as I can. I've watched a few different bits and pieces about it, and I just wanted to come at it as from the perspective of somebody that owns the GH5, owns the GH6, and my sort of perspective on the pros and cons and the sort of spec differences, and we'll just kind of run through it. And there's a few things actually that I've not seen anybody talk about, but I can see them in the specs. So I don't know if they're things that people don't really care about or they just sort of got overlooked. I mean, it's a massive camera, like an absolutely massive camera. There's so much in it. And, people probably only got a couple of weeks maybe to test it. Could have been a bit more than that. But, so there are little bits in there that I sort of feel like have not really been addressed. There's certainly in no videos I've seen. So, we'll just kind of run through it. So, first off, we'll look at, the official price, £2,000. So we're looking at essentially the same price as the GH6 launched at. So, I don't think that's... out of the ordinary for the pricing, because we're looking at the essentially that kind of same camera body with all new features, and we'll kind of run through all of those. So, to start with, the actual similarities, it's in the GH6 body, so that's great. You still get all your tally lamp, sync port, you get your front record button, and sort of one of the most important things for me, it's probably not actually even in the things on this, it's got the screen coming out. You've got your articulating screen, but you've also got the tilt up screen as well, and that's a really nice kind of, it's a nice camera design. I'm glad they didn't just take the sort of ethos of the GH6 and dump it into the G9 Mark II body, or essentially the S5 Mark II body as well, because I feel like this body is a lot better for video. You've got your dedicated lock button and those kind of things. So it's I think it's nice that they've done that. For me initially, that is a good sign that they've kind of gone with that. And obviously you've got your rear fan as well, which the other cameras do have the kind of active cooling, but they don't have as big a fan, so that led to slightly different designs in those cameras. But for the GH6, where you've got the CF Express card, I think you really need that fan there, because otherwise it probably would be overheating, and that's something the GH5 and what looks like the GH6 would kind of never do. So yeah. And because we've got the same body design, that also means that it will fit into existing accessories like cages and things like that. So that's really handy. If you're looking to upgrade from the GH6 to the GH7, you could potentially keep the accessories and sell the camera, or you can switch it between those two cameras if you're keeping a kind of A cam, B cam kind of setup. The ratings for the camera, all pretty similar. Dust and splash resistant. Works to temperatures down to -10°C, and the kind of dynamic range on the camera is essentially the same again. So it's up to 13 stops of dynamic range. What we'll do is we'll switch into the so I've got the GH6 specs, I've got the GH7 specs, can get to the top of the page, and the G9 Mark II as well, just so we can go through like a couple of little comparisons between them. So you can kind of see in there, what we'll do is we'll scroll down, so you don't have to kind of take my word for some of these specs. So if we look at, it's actually under latitude rather than dynamic range, but we've got so 13 plus stops in Vlog, and that's when the sensor output is less than 60 FPS. Essentially, this is the DR Boost implementation. So on the Panasonic GH6, we have to activate it manually, which is a bit annoying. It is a bit annoying. G9 Mark II, they came about it in a different way, and they did it so basically any footage under 60 FPS, you're getting 13 stops automatically, DR boost enabled. Anything over 60 FPS, when you enable that in the camera, you switch down to 12 plus stops. And we're talking about in the Vlog picture profile here. But yeah, essentially that was the kind of difference between the two. So what they've done in the new GH7, it works in the same way. So you've got the, when you step up above it, works in the same way as the G9 Mark II. So when you step up above that, you're getting that, and you don't have to enable any of that stuff. And we'll kind of come back to this in a minute in the improvements. But that's essentially, you know, it's the same dynamic range, but in a slightly different way, which, like I say, we'll cover. You've got in terms of the sensor, you've got the 25.2 megapixel sensor. It's as if they've basically just taken the G9 Mark II sensor and put it into this camera. So obviously with that comes PDAF, which is, you know, or phase hybrid AF, which is a big part of this camera. So, you know, that's it's a similar sensor size to the GH6 if you're coming from that camera, but it addresses some of those issues, like you've got the in those very high contrasting scenes, you've got things like the streaking that obviously doesn't happen in the G9 Mark II, or it's not as pronounced. And because we're still in the same body, you're not going to get a battery grip on it. So that's probably something worth noting. If you're coming from the S5 or you're coming from the G9 Mark II, the GH6 body and GH7 body, they don't have a port on the bottom for a battery grip. So you won't be able to use those. There is no option there. And it's not as if they could kind of bring one in the future, because there's just no communication sort of port on the bottom. So that is the same if you've got the GH6, but it won't be the same if you've got the GH5, G9 Mark II, S5, any of those, if you're looking to sort of come across from those cameras. And in terms of the actual body changes, there aren't a great deal. It is using the GH6 body essentially, but there are a couple of small differences. So if you look at the weight, we've got, I mean, you can basically see the height, width and depth are essentially all exactly the same. So it's the same body. But the weight actually on the GH7, you can see it's 805 grams, is ever so slightly lighter than the GH6. It's not going to make a massive difference, but you know, every sort of gram you can lose in a camera body is good. So it comes in slightly lighter than the GH6, so that's quite good. And the other, I mean, I say big feature, it's really the only feature that's changed in the body. The viewfinder is ever so slightly bigger. So I'm not sure actually if they give the viewfinder. Yeah, they do give the viewfinder specs on here. So let's have a quick look at that. So you've got the, that's the magnification for it. That's the rear monitor. I'm not sure it's actually going to give the exact specs for it, but the essentially the eyepiece for it is ever so slightly bigger. So you know, that's a little bit of an improvement. It's not massive, but you know, it is a change in there. So if you've got the GH6, the eyepiece for it, or the electronic viewfinder, is slightly different in this camera. So what we'll do is we'll go on to sort of the improvements, and like I say, the biggest one really is the implementation of, well, I say the biggest one. If you're coming from the GH6, the biggest one is the DR boosts implementation. So rather than having to go like way up high to 2000 in Vlog, you're essentially going to 500 ISO. So that is much better. 2000 Vlog, you know, you're starting off at a very high ISO and it could get quite noisy. You need NDs in bright light. It was a bit difficult to work with, to be honest. So DR boost on this camera is being dealt with in a much better way. So like I say, and in the normal picture profiles, I believe it goes to 400 on the GH6, and on this it's ISO 100. So there's literally no compromise there in the standard picture profiles. So we're talking standard, natural, vivid, you know, all the kind of ones that are built in on the camera. So yeah, you're essentially going to have a bit less noise there, and it makes the Vlog picture profile a lot more workable. The internal image stabilization as well. Surprisingly, I didn't think this was possible because of the fan, but they've managed to improve that ever so slightly again. So you get slightly better internal body image stabilization. It's not leaps ahead of the GH6, but there is an improvement there. And also they've put it in there so that the e-stabilization, this recently came about on the on some of the other newer cameras. They've made it so that it reduces the warping in the corners of some of the video. So that's quite nice, really. So they've essentially fixed some of the issues that the IBIS had. I mean, there weren't really issues, but, you know, it just makes it look a bit cleaner. It comes at a slight compromise of a crop, but, you know, it is quite good. So if you're fast moving, you're running, you're not using a gimbal, you've got some like quite nice options there for that. And obviously the big one, if we look at the, actually they don't call it PDF, they call it phase, don't they? So let's have a look at on the GH7, is it in there as phase? Yeah, so you've got it's got in here about the new autofocus, and obviously it's the one that's been pulled in from the G9 Mark II, S5 Mark II, and Mark IIX both sort of have it as well. So you've got all new PDAF. It's going to be obviously a lot better than the original DFD autofocus. The main thing about it is you just need to do less with it. You know, with DFD, it can be totally workable, but you do need to do a bit of hand holding with DFD. You need to tell it, you know, a lot of information for it to work quite well. Sometimes you need to use additional tools with it to make it work well, whereas with PDAF, it's just a lot more kind of responsive. You don't need to hand hold it as much, and you get additional subject detection on there, like trains, planes, motorbike detection, even things like helmet detection for like riders of motorbikes. You've got some really good stuff in there. And then in terms of like the big headline features, obviously one of the big ones, you've got the you know, the sensor, which sort of a weird one because it's not you know, it's not a massive headline feature from the GH6, but it is a different sensor. Hybrid AF we just talked about, and then you've got ProRes RAW HQ. So this is obviously a massive upgrade from there. We've never had internal RAW in in any Lumix camera. Internal ProRes, you get that in the Panasonic GH6. You can do it over SSD with like the S5 Mark IIX. You can do it over SSD with G9 Mark II. But that is just standard ProRes. It's not ProRes RAW. So here we're looking at ProRes RAW internal recording. And to be honest, that is one of the things that's actually quite amazing about it. It's not just ProRes RAW that goes out to an SSD. You can actually do it internally because you've got CF Express Type B cards on the GH7 like you had on the GH6. So you can actually shoot that RAW internally. To be honest, it's going to be absolutely massive. So like a standard kind of calculation for ProRes RAW, 2 terabytes is probably going to get you around an hour. So yeah, you'd need a huge internal CF Express card to get any substantial footage onto it. But yeah, it's, you know, that's pretty amazing that they've managed to do that. I wasn't sure that would ever happen. Like you've got obviously Nikon just bought Red, and Red had a patent, so people couldn't really have internal RAW in cameras. I sort of felt that was the way it was going when they had ProRes internally, and it seemed like, you know, I was hoping they could get it to that point, and it's pretty good. Like I am impressed by that. It's not something I use all the time, but you know, it's really good to have in there. So you've got internal RAW recording at 5.7K, 30 frames a second or 25 frames a second, depending on what system frequency you use. Or you can have it at C4K at 60 frames a second. So, you know, you've got a couple of options. You've got up to 60 frames a second in there, slightly beyond the resolution of 4K. And if you're shooting in that, obviously, if you don't know anything about RAW, it's absolutely massive, as I said. So, you know, it's not workable for, you know, everybody, but in post, if you make mistakes in white balance or you've cranked your ISO up too high, you can actually resolve some of those issues in post. And it's going to just look clean. You're not going to get sort of like weird artifacts and color issues when you're changing white balance. You'll be able to reduce the noise a little bit. There's more work to shooting in RAW, but it's nice that they've put it in there. There'll be working in C4K, there'll be a slight crop when you're working on a 4K timeline. And I have talked about that in another video actually, so I'll link to that above. But there'll be a little bit of a crop there, but you're getting essentially raw video, 4K, 60 frames a second, potentially internally or to an SSD, that's pretty great really. You can't sort of argue with that. And then we've also got, I won't cover the 32-bit float, I'll cover that in a sort of accessories bit, but we've got in there, these are some of the things that came across from the other cameras. So you've got, I'm not sure if they put that in, no they don't put it in as a headline feature. So you've got proxy recording. So essentially, if you don't know what proxy recording is, you're recording full-size video. A proxy recording is kind of like a low-res version of that video. And then when you're in your editing suite, you can work with a low-res footage, and it's nice and easy to scrub through the timeline, add all your stuff. You can do your renders very quickly, and then or your render previews. And then when you go to actually render the whole lot of footage, you can get that footage out using the sort of full resolution stuff. It just switches to using the full size video, and then you get a nice big export. So it can be a really good way to work if you're if you're working on an older machine, or you're sort of out and about working on a laptop and you're really struggling with kind of big file sizes. It's a really good way to work. So that's nice that that's been integrated in there. That also is in the G9 Mark II, and I believe that made it into the S5 Mark II and Mark IIX recently in that firmware update. And one of the things, two of the things actually I've not really heard many people talk about. One of the things you do get in here, so there's probably thousands of bits that say pre in there, but one of the bits you actually get in there is the pre-burst feature from the G9 Mark II and now the S5 Mark II. So that's really nice. So essentially, for people that do photography, if you're doing burst photography, quite often, I mean, for me anyway, if I'm shooting particular things, I mean, it's for things like birds and planes and that type of stuff, it's really useful. Anything fast moving that you're trying to hit with a burst shot, it basically gives you like a few additional frames before you took the shot. So you get that you get those additional frames in there to work with. So if you just missed a bird taking off, or like a motorbike went past you and you completely missed the first part of it, you get those additional pre-frames before you even press the shutter. So that's really nice. And I know it's a video camera, or a video orientated camera, but it is also a hybrid camera. So that's really nice that they haven't held that back from the G series cameras, because I thought they would do. I thought that would be exclusively G9 Mark II, but that's really good from Panasonic that they've moved that across. And another big one, it's not one that I think a lot of people have been kind of screaming for, but I think that there were people that kind of were a bit annoyed that the GH6 never did live streaming. So this one's got wireless and wired live streaming, so you've got options to kind of hook it up, and you've got some options in the camera, so you can see you've got YouTube, Facebook Live. So that's a nice little feature. It's not a massive headline feature really, but it's a good one for some people that want to use these cameras for that. Because one of the great things about the Lumix cameras, you can just plug them in over the AC10 wall unit, which I'll link a video about that and sort of what that is. But you can just plug it in, and the GH6, I don't have the GH7 in front of me, but the GH6, you could run that all day long, and it would, you could use it for a live streaming camera. It's a good camera for that, because it's not going to overheat. It can just sit there running for as long as you want it to, basically. So it's great for that. And then we've got Frame IO integration. Again, it's not going to be for everybody, but it can take those kind of proxy files that we talked about before, ping those up to Frame IO, which is essentially like it's like a collaborative editing platform. So it pushes the files up. The editor can pick them up on the other side. You can leave editor's notes and things like that there. So you can get a really fast turnaround on videos using stuff like that. So, if you're the person that shoots it and you've got an editor somewhere else ready to do get it turned around and out, it's it's a really nice integration to have. So I've used Frame.io on a couple of projects with people, and I've got to admit it's actually really good. It's not for everybody. If you're a solo shooter, there's probably not really any benefit in it, but if you're working with a small team, it's really good. One thing I haven't heard anybody talk about, which I really like, which is probably, it didn't make it into any of these cameras, which is a bit strange. I don't know why it kind of disappeared. I mean, maybe people don't really use it. Like I said, I've not heard anybody talk about it, so it's obviously a feature that not a lot of people use. But live cropping's back, and I really like live cropping because it's just you can kind of basically set up a shot, and then you can take, say you're filming in 4K. You can take that wider bit of the frame from, you've got a 5.8K sensor. That's kind of the wrong shape, but you've got like more latitude in the sensor to actually have like a crop where you don't lose resolution. So that's a really good feature. So I'm glad that's kind of back, and who knows, maybe that's even going to come back into other cameras by a firmware update. I feel like it's one of those ones where it's sort of dropped off, and then I think a few people sort of chirped up about it on the Lumix lives, and then they sort of just brought it back for this camera. So that's the nice one to see that back. I'm happy to see that back in the cameras again. And another big one, which again, I haven't really seen anyone talk about this either, again because most people are coming at this from a video point of view, which is absolutely fair, but I do also use mine as I use my GH6 as a photography camera as well. So Live View Composite was another one where I thought, I hope that comes to the GH6 in firmware. I bought it knowing it didn't have it, but I sort of thought hopefully that'll maybe come to it, but it never did. But it's here in the GH7, so again, that's great. They're really they're not differentiating so much, so it's kind of like the G9 gets this and the GH7 gets this. They've actually done a really nice kind of, we'll just put those features in it. So you've got Live View Composite, you've got pre-burst, and that's great, really. Like, I think that's really nice that they've done that. And then the other thing we've got in there is obviously another thing we didn't get in the, it's 2 words, isn't it? Another thing we didn't ever get in the, that we didn't get in the GH6 was real-time LUT, and it's one of those ones where I would really like to see it in the camera, but I don't know how much I would use it because I'd be a bit worried that baking the LUT in I might actually ruin the footage. So I tend to just use Vlog View Assist, which I'll link up to that in the corner, but View Assist is more like you can see the LUT when you're recording, but it's not actually baked into the footage. I can still go back in post and I can change it. But I do like the idea of it. And for photography, I think that's quite a nice feature. So, it's good that it made it into this. Again, I feel like that is a feature that sort of sits across both. It's not a photography feature. It's not a video feature. It works for both. So, it's nice that they've brought that in anyway and kind of allowed that in both cameras. So, you can see like there's a lot of features kind of building up that they are in other cameras at the moment, and if you've got the GH6 you're probably a bit frustrated that they haven't made it to the GH6. Whether they will, I don't know, but at least they're here in the GH7 because they could have quite easily held a lot of these back. This one is right next to it. This one I'm kind of Lumix Lab. I'm slightly surprised but also not at the same time about this feature because again, for photography, it's great. You can just ping stuff over to it, do a few edits, post it out to social media. The thing is with the GH7 and, coming from the GH6, I know how big their video files are. They're absolutely massive. Even the smallest video files are large. And I mean, I wouldn't really want to be sending those across to my phone because it would take all the space up on it. And the sort of the slight downside is that they didn't give the GH7 MP4 Lite, which is the kind of small, just a little get that out to kind of social type file size. It would almost be useful if you could just send your proxies out to Lumix Lab. I don't know if that's the thing actually, but you know, the little proxy files would probably be more than good enough to go out to kind of social channels. But yeah, without MP4 Lite, I sort of feel like this is probably a little bit more reserved to photo. Certainly for my phone and tablet, I don't think it could take the strain of the video sizes coming from the GH7. And another thing that's actually really good, I think I only saw it in one video. It's probably not actually even in this, because it's not really so much a spec as it is. Yeah, it's not really in here. So you can do there's new filtering options now, which I believe actually made it into the G9 Mark II. And possibly even the S5 series. So it's a filtering option for video where you can actually you can filter between the types of video that you want to use. So if you want only video types that support proxies, you can filter by that. You can filter by ones that support VFR. If you don't know what that is, I'll link to a video on VFR. You can link to certain, just like filter by certain codecs or resolutions. And obviously you've got the My Record list as well, which again, I've done a video on, so I'll link to that. But you've sort of still got the My Record menu or list, but then on top of that, you've also got this filtering. So that can be really good because the actual, I mean, I'll scroll up to here. So the video options start here. They go all the way down to, keep going, all the way down to there. Some of them are for different system frequencies, but you get the idea. There's a lot of video options in there, and it can be just so cumbersome sometimes when you just want to dip in, find the one that you want, and then get back out of it. If you're sort of actually shooting at that time and you've got things to do, it's good to have all these little shortcuts. So one of the things they talked about was this feature called crop zoom. And my understanding of this, I mean, someone might tell me I'm wrong here, but my understanding of this is that it's essentially just X-Tele, which isn't there anymore. So essentially what it allows you to do is to crop into pictures as you're taking the photo. So, essentially when you take raw photos anyway, it takes them at the full kind of sensor size. I'll link to a video to explain it a bit better, but basically you could say I want a like a 4x3 video, a 4x3 photo or a 1x1 photo, but it'll always capture it at that sort of 4x3 aspect ratio in full size. And what the crop zoom does is it's essentially just cropping in as you're taking the pictures, which you could do in post, but if you want to do it for, I guess, like social or something like that, it can be useful for that. But yeah, correct me if I'm wrong there, but I feel like that's just the X-Tele feature, which I'll link to, so you can kind of look at that and see what it is. So the next thing, really, you sort of won't be able to see some of this because they're just bug fixes. So this is really good because I was a bit worried that the GH7 wasn't going to address any of the bug fixes from the GH6. So one of them, you've got the info display when you're shooting out to an external monitor. You get that on both screens now, which is great because that was so annoying on the GH6. That was just such a bad, I mean, I would call that a bug because it's something that used to be in the cameras before, and then they took it out, and then now it's back again. I don't know why you would ever remove that as a feature, but that's good that that's there. 4-channel audio, you'll know if you own the GH6, G9 Mark II, S5, 2 or 2X, you get 4-channel audio every time you hit record. It doesn't matter if you've got the XLR1 adapter attached, it's always there. It's always 4 channels of audio. 2 of them are dead, 2 of them are your actual channels of audio. In this camera, they've done it so that it actually only records 2 channels of audio, unless you're using the XLR2 adapter, which we'll come to in a bit, the XLR2 adapter. But essentially, if you're not using it, it just does 2 channels of audio. So that's so much easier. I mean, it doesn't take that long in post to fix that, having 4 channels of audio, but it's just annoying, it shouldn't be like that. So it's good that they've done that. Again, this is probably, it's not really a bug, but again, DR boost, you don't have to switch it on and off. It just does it itself. So great. That's for me, that was almost like a little bit of a bug because it was a bit annoying, like the way it was implemented. And another one, a couple of these really are just if you use monitors, but the HDMI latency has been slightly improved again, because that was quite bad on the on the GH6, so it's good that they've improved that again. And then we'll kind of come to the add-ons. So we've got a couple of things here. So one of them, we've got they're doing a like a upgrade key add-on like they used to do for Vlog. Now they're doing an add-on for ARRI Log C. So essentially, if you use ARRI cameras and Lumix cameras, it's going to give you obviously a way where you can match both of them without having to try to match Vlog with Log C3, and it's essentially just giving you a better workflow to do that. But also, people might be interested to look at it anyway, because you've got you've kind of got all these bits in here. If you come in, you've got all these different kind of looks that you can come in and take a look at and sort of see. And I think there's about sort of 70 to 80 of these. And essentially, it just gives you, if you got it, you'd have a full library of ready-made kind of looks that you can just sort of apply to your footage. So it's not bad, really. I mean, the upgrade key is £200. If you're working with, actually, I'm not sure if that was dollars or pounds. It might have been dollars, but somewhere around there. So yeah, if you're working with ARRI cameras, obviously that makes sense. But potentially, if you're just looking to have like a really solid, if you like the looks of these, it might be something that you find really useful to do quick kind of turnarounds on videos. If you might not need to do a whole lot of grading on your kind of stuff if you're sort of happy with some of the things that are kind of sat in here. So there's all kinds of like I said, there's all kinds of different ones, and I'll leave the link in here, and you can kind of have a look and sort of see some of these different kind of looks to see if you like them or not. But basically, it's good news, this one, because this is coming to the GH7, but also to the GH6. So GH6 users also get the option for this. And to be honest, I'll probably get the key just to kind of check out some of this stuff, because some of these are really nice looks, and I'd be interested to kind of give them a try. So I'm quite happy that's coming to the GH6. There's a little bit of kind of promise on the horizon there for that camera. And the next thing we'll talk about, so we've got the 32-bit float has really been pushed in as a spec of the camera, so we've got, let's quickly see if we can, it's in the top line for it, 32-bit float recording there, world's first 32-bit float recording. But the thing to bear in mind here, it's not internal, it's only with this adapter. So you've got to understand that you can't record 32-bit float internally without this. You have to buy the XLR2. So essentially, you can see it's on. It's there for pre-order. It's that's sort of actually the wrong price there, because that's ex VAT. So let's do it with VAT. It's $499, and I don't really know what that would be in dollars. I guess like $550 to $600, somewhere around there. Or US dollars. So, you can see here it's coming out late 2024, which it looks like the actual GH7 will be shipping around mid to late July. So it's somewhere around in line with that. It looks like a great unit. It's got it's got all those kind of additional ports that you need for professional use. So 2 XLR ports. You've got that 32-bit float there. So I mean, really, the sort of layman's terms of 32-bit float is you can kind of mess up your audio as much as you like, and you can bring it back into acceptable levels. So it doesn't really clip as much. I mean, you're still going to want to be setting your levels fairly well, but there are times where it's actually very hard to do that. So say like a concert, sometimes people are louder than other people. There's a lot of shouting. Some people might talk quietly. And then on top of that, you've got the applause from the crowd and things like that. So it's an absolute nightmare in terms of levels. So if you're doing stuff like that, this is an absolute, it's a lifesaver. It's something that you're just going to want. I find it less of an issue in interviews and things like that, because I tell people not to shout or whisper, and it's perfectly usable without 32-bit float. But there's certainly instances, events for one, is just, it's a lifesaver for that. So, you know, that's a great additional feature. But like I say, just remember this is an add-on product. It's not something that is part of the camera. And my understanding of it is this is just going to be the 32-bit float aspect of it. I don't know if it says anywhere on here about that, but the 32-bit float aspect of it, I believe, is like a hardware limitation in the camera side as well. So here we go. So it says compatible model as of June 2024, the GH7. So you're essentially not going to be able to just plug this into one of the older cameras and then it just kind of works in 32-bit float. It will work, but not with 32-bit float. So, you know, just kind of bear that in mind. It's it looks like a good accessory though. You've got like obviously for the older cameras, there's nothing stopping you from recording 32-bit float anyway externally. There's plenty of devices out there that do that. But you know, the benefit here is that you're going to be able to essentially bake it into the video that you're recording in the camera. So when you get your video file out, your 32-bit float audio is already there. You know, that is the benefit there. And then the next accessory we've got, oh sorry, that's the same one. We could have looked at that one. We've got I couldn't actually, there was an image on this before, but it's not here anymore. But what we could do actually on the GH7, if we scroll to the bottom, essentially what Panasonic have done is they've released this new accessory here. So there's not a page for it yet, but it's essentially the dummy battery for the Panasonic GH6, and essentially it works on any BLK22 battery camera, is the DCC17. So they've released a new adapter that is the DCC18, and the DCC18 basically allows you to pop this into your camera, and then you've got a USB-C port on the bottom of it, and you can plug your camera into a power bank or into some kind of V-mount supply that has USB-C. So that's quite nice, and apparently it's powerful enough to be able to, the idea of it is that it can power the camera and the SSD drive. So it frees up the SSD port for the USB-C port for SSD recording, and it still gives you the option to power the camera over USB. I will probably get this and have like a bit of a test with it and stuff, but essentially I've already got a third-party cheap knockoff of this, and I'll show you. I'll link a video to it and you can see essentially what it does. Will this be more reliable? Yeah, I would have thought so. So I probably will get this, because where they do offer official kind of power sources, I do generally pick them up, because then if something goes wrong, it's gone wrong through a official power accessory and your warranty's not voided. So, you know, that's quite a useful little extra. The price is absolutely all over the place with this. I think this was $100 yesterday. Now it's $39.99. I've seen it for $69.99 on other places. When you compare it to how much the DCC17 adapter was, you can see here on CVP, it's about, you know, £34. So the $39.99 mark, that sits somewhere about right. So hopefully it's around that price. So that would be nice. $40, I can live with that. Most of the accessories are a bit more expensive than that. So that's good. I can live with that. And then that sort of covers all of those bits. I mean, for me, with the, like I say, with this additional accessory, the DCC18, I probably, you know, I'm just going to be using V-mount batteries anyway. I've already got V-mounts for this. I've already got all the cables and stuff. I'll link out to like the power solutions that I use for my Lumix cameras, but you know, it doesn't hurt to have an additional power source available. So, you know, I'll pick one of these up anyway, and I'll probably do a couple videos on how it works and bits like that. And then that kind of brings me to my kind of dislikes of the camera. And, you know, obviously don't take any of these to kind of heart. It's just my experiences of the current GH6, where the GH7 sits, and some of the shortcomings that I can kind of already see on it. So for me, let's just go back onto the specs page for it. Okay, I was already on it. Let's just jump back to the top of here if we can. We've got, essentially the same battery and output times as the if we do BLK22. So you can see here, and then if we jump into the GH6, we'll go to power, into the, if it's under the same bit, yeah, there you go. So you can see it's basically, it's the same battery, so obviously it's going to give the same power output, 330 images. For video, quite often they spec that you can get nearly 90 minutes of video. That's probably at quite low frame rates and resolutions, because I've found usually when I do it, you get nearer to the hour than an hour and a half, which obviously is not fantastic. So, you know, for anybody new coming into this, for me it's fine. Like I say, I've got plenty of BLK22 batteries, I've got V-mounts, all of this stuff. But for anyone new coming into this, if you're going to do a day's shooting with this camera, you're going to need either a handful of batteries, BLK22s, and be able to have the time to cycle them, switch the camera off, put your battery in, potentially redo your settings back to what you wanted, or have some external power supplies to hand, because it's difficult doing a, you know, even a half day shoot is difficult with the GH6, and I can see it being difficult with this using internal batteries. So just kind of bear that in mind. You know, I would have liked to see a more powerful battery in this camera, but you know, it is what it is. It's you know, it's workable. It's just bear that in mind. We sort of talked about the DCC-18. That is kind of their solution to not having two USB-C ports. Would I have liked to see two USB-C ports in the camera? Definitely. It would have made life a lot easier. And then you could run a power bank into it and just topping up the internal battery, not as a dummy battery. And you could also have SSD running. For me, that would have been the ideal scenario. I much would rather see that than another USB-C accessory. But again, you know, I think what they've done is cut the cost by just keeping the body type the same. And that kind of leads to the next one. Having mismatched card slots, again, super annoying. I don't know why they think that's a good idea. And, you know, even I see a lot of people saying, oh, it's because, you know, people coming up to this camera are going to want to use their SD cards. To be honest, your SD cards from your old cameras are probably going to be too slow. They're not really going to work with a lot of the video formats on this camera. And they're just a bit pointless. Dual CF Express card slots on this would have been a million times better than mismatched card slots again, because the main reason for it is you can't back up any of those kind of bigger file sizes. So if you're using H.265, that's mostly long GOP video, that's great. You can back that up perfectly fine, no issues. Obviously, photography, anything like that, you know, it's all fine. But then when you step up to shooting all intra, so usually H.264, shooting ProRes and now ProRes RAW, you've just got no backup option. You can shoot to an SSD, but you can't back it up to the CF Express card. You can shoot to the CF Express card, but you can't back it up to the SSD. The SD cards are too slow. So, you know, I guess you've got proxy recording. That's sort of like a backup, but, you know, it's backing up a tiny file. You know, it's not a real true backup. So, you know, that for me is I was real disappointed about that. You know, just dual CF Express Type B card slots. I just thought that was, you know, it should have been a given, but for whatever reason, it didn't happen. Again, I think probably just cutting corners, keeping the same body design, because, you know, it's essentially the GH6 body with that different viewfinder. So yeah, that's a bit disappointing. I'm not going to lie there. And like I say, you know, it only affects you if you're using those bigger file sizes. So yeah, it might not affect you at all. But the AF detection modes in a higher frame rates, no sort of big improvements there, which is, you know, would have been nice to see, you know, some improvements in the higher frame rates, some kind of different, at least some kind of like detection and tracking options and bits like that. In the 5.8K, I think what everybody wanted to see as a new top line feature would have been 60 frames a second. That would have been great. And then open gate, you know, you could have shot open gate 60 frames. You've got like a little bit of latitude to kind of get like slow-mo out of that. You know, that would have been great. I would have probably just pre-ordered it on the day if that was a thing. That's a great feature. I don't know if that's a limitation of the current hardware, but for whatever reason, that didn't kind of show up. So, you know, you can see in the specs, we've got 5.8K, still just limited to 30 frames. Yeah, again, you know, that sort of is what it is. There's still no 422 options for 4K 120. That would have been nice to see that in there. I don't know, again, if that's a hardware limitation, but it's, for whatever reason, it's not there. The internal ProRes RAW, again, you know, it's a bit of a wild notion that this has kind of even been put in there. So you can't really quibble with it. But my only kind of gripe with it would be that if you want to do 4K 120, you still got to go out and use a HDMI recorder. So really, if you're doing matching with this, you'd be getting yourself an Atomos Ninja 5 Plus, because that's the only one that's going to do 4K 120 recording. So, you know, you're looking at outlaying another sort of £800 to have that, and an SSD, probably actually slightly more than that. So, you know, it's that's my one kind of quibble with that. Like I say, it's a small one because it's, you know, it's got internal RAW, which is crazy, but at the same time, it's like it would have been great if it just covered all of those kind of frame rates. One thing that it does annoy me a bit with the camera, this menu here, so the USB SSD, switching it on and off option, it's a bit annoying that you can't just plug in the SSD and then the camera just, you know, looks at that and says, oh, an SSD's just been plugged in. Do you want to switch on SSD recording? Yes. And then when you want to unplug it, sure, you can either just power down the camera, or you could actually, you know, just use the option to get rid of it, because, you know, you do have to eject it safely. I've got no issue with that. That's fine. But, you know, just being able to plug it in and just say, yes, an SSD, that would just make life so much easier. So hopefully that comes at some point. And then the last one, it's this is one that probably me and about 2 other people care about, but I'd really like it if they could increase the brackets on this. So the bracketing mode is still just the same as this is actually on the, that's on the GH5, but you can see that the brackets are just kind of always the same, so 3 or 5 all positions. It's yeah, it's slightly annoying that you can't have bigger steps between the bracketing on there. And in terms of the ProRes RAW, you know, I know a lot of people have been saying, oh, it should have been Blackmagic RAW. It's really disappointing that it's ProRes RAW. For me, I don't mind that. I use Premiere Pro. You don't have all the options for ProRes RAW in Premiere Pro, but, you know, you can do a little bit with it. Or I'll use Final Cut depending on the deliverable. If I'm shooting ProRes RAW, I'll be using Final Cut. And to be honest, I rarely use it for direct client work. I barely ever use it, but I've had it requested on a few projects where clients want me to just shoot and then they do the editing of the footage. So to be honest, it doesn't hurt, as you know, to have that as kind of like a string in your bow, essentially. It just means that you don't have to turn down work. If somebody comes to you wanting raw footage, you know, you're sort of equipped to do it. You probably have to tell them that it's not going to be in a kind of standard 4K size, but, you know, apart from that, you're able to shoot it. So there's no real problems there. It's a nice thing to sort of have. And, you know, overall, I think on paper, I do think it's a good upgrade. I was a little bit, seeing some of the leaks, I was a little bit unsure about it. I was kind of like, none of the top line specs have changed. But I think it's one of those things where you've got so many small things, and when you add them all up, you're actually getting a lot there, really. There's lots of little features that you add all together. And like I say, even if you don't use RAW, or, you know, ProRes RAW, let's say you don't want the new phase AF, there's still some good little features in there that have been added in. So it's I think it's it is a good upgrade. And the main thing is really that it does address some of the issues of the GH6, which is really good. And it looks like even the GH6 might even be getting a few sort of firmware updates on the horizon. So that's really good. And I suppose the main thing is, you know, what stopped me from kind of pre-ordering is just the card mismatch. and the lack of kind of backup recording for ProRes or Intra and RAW, for me that's just a bit annoying for client work, and I don't want to have to shoot everything in long op to get backup recording, because you've got all those great shooting features on the camera, and yeah, I just feel like that's a bit frustrating to not have backup for them. But I feel like Panasonic are on the right track. They've got proxies now that are being recorded at the same time, so they must be close to the CF Express card backing up to SD footage, and vice versa. It's got to be close to happening. It's like at the moment it's like they don't quite talk to each other, but they just need to get it to the point where that kind of works, and I think one of the main reasons why I wasn't kind of jumping on it, I think everybody wants the PDAF, and for my personal use case, I don't particularly need PDAF. I find the DFD works quite well with the focus limiter. For kind of talking head stuff, I don't really have any issues with that. And when I'm worried, I just change the aperture to just sort of put my mind at ease. I don't need like razor sharp depth of field. And if I did, I wouldn't be using MFT, because full frame's much better for that. And, I'm not knocking MFT, that's what I shoot on. I like it. But coming from full frame, I can tell you that the depth of field it's a lot easier to get like the shallow depth of field on full frame, and that's just the way it works really. It's easier to get that, and it's not a big deal for me. So for run and gun, I use the focus wheel on my Ronin gimbal. I'm sure that'd be to many people's horror, but if I had good reliable PDAF, who knows, maybe I would kind of start using that instead. But I'm quite happy using the focus wheel on there, and I don't really need the proxy recordings because my machine just handles the footage out of the camera fine, whether it's long op or all intra. It's I've got no issues with it. So I think the main thing that draws me to it is actually that DR boost update, that came from the G9 Mark II. You've got those lower base the lower base ISOs. So especially in Vlog, it's a massive change. 2,000 down to 500. It's quite significant. And it's funny because some of the features that actually make it appealing to me aren't even video features. You've got the pre-burst, live view composite, and they're features I would have loved to see in the GH6. And the fact that they're in the GH7, I'd sort of say, well done Panasonic for not holding those back, and I kind of applaud them for adding those into the GH series and not just sort of holding them back to their what would be their kind of photography side of the business. So it's I think it's a very balanced kind of whether you should go for it. I mean, in terms of from my GH5 going up to the 7, I think it's a no-brainer. Going up from the 6 to the 7, for my use case, I'm not quite so sure, but I'm still not 100% if I'm going to pre-order, but it's really nice to know that that's there on the market if I need it. And unless you kind of twist my arm in the comments, I kind of might reconsider. But let me know down in the comments if you kind of pre-ordered and what your thoughts on it were, and which camera you're jumping up from if you're kind of coming from a different camera. It'd be quite interesting to know.